Hi, hello, it's me, Steph. Welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, I'm Steph. So today I wanted to talk to you about things that I love in books, but this is mainly going to be about vibes. It's going to be about the vibes that I love in books. I think this will make more sense once I start to explain the things that I love in books, but there are things in here that are tropes or are plot devices, etc. But the reason I love them isn't necessarily for how they're used, it's how they make me feel. Again, I think this will make sense once I start explaining this. You just need to trust the process. Or you don't. I don't know. Anyway, I wrote down things that I love in books. It's all about the vibes. And I have 2 pages worth of things. I'm sure stuff will come to me as I'm speaking. I will also try and give examples of books where these vibes just were immaculate to me. So let's get started. The first one, which should come as no surprise to anybody because I've mentioned it in multiple videos. So if you are not new here and you've watched some of my videos, I've probably said this phrase to death, but I'm a character-driven reader. So for me, the number one thing that I love in books is falling in love with characters. I find that oftentimes a book doesn't work for me, or I've rated it maybe average or low because I didn't connect with the characters. And that's not always the best way of reading a book because there's so much more to books. I completely understand that. But because I go into a book really wanting to get to know characters and to fall in love with characters, it's hard for me to fully love a book if I don't love the characters. I think it's safe to say if you know any of my favorite books of all time or series of all time, a big part of why I love those series are characters. More recently, I read the David Bode trilogy and I just finished the short story collection on audiobook, and I've come to realize that with all of the David Bode trilogy's faults, the one thing that keeps me going and keeps me thinking about this series even a week or 2 after I have finished are the characters. And that feeling is such a good feeling to me. And that's why I love characters in books and just the vibe of really getting to know a character. And I think the reason I'm so drawn to fantasy, because most fantasy writers write series, and so you get a lot of time with characters that you love. Now, the caveat to that is that oftentimes in a series, there are perspectives that are insufferable, but you push through because you love the other characters. So speaking of characters, another thing that I love in books are when books are high stakes. So even though I love my characters and I hold them dearly to me, I want someone to die. Because if the book doesn't have high stakes, then I'm not really fearful for the characters that I love, and I'm not really buying what's happening if there's a war about to happen, you know what I'm saying? So things have to be relatively high stakes, like not everyone has to die. But there are some key players that need to die in a story, especially because I do read a lot of fantasy. Fantasy oftentimes has war, probably because I pick up like political fantasies a lot, usually has war. Anyway, if it has war, someone needs to die that's like in the main cast. Let's be real. If that's not happening, it'll probably, if I like the characters enough, still be a good book to me, but I'll be a little bit disappointed that the stakes weren't high enough for me to fear for their lives. I also forgot to mention that I did not write this list in an order that actually makes sense, so this will probably be jumping around a lot. Sorry about that. Anyway, my third vibe is small towns. I don't know how to explain it. I love small town settings. They are my favorite type of setting, which I typically like a small town setting that is set in like a forest, mountain town, woodsy town. I don't know that I have found a book yet where a beach town has been the vibe for me, but I'm not going to rule it out. I just love small town settings. And I think that's because another vibe that I love is when a character is trying to find themselves at any age. I kind of like it when they're older because it's relatable to my old ass. We don't have enough stories about like 30s, 40s, 50-year-olds trying to find themselves. Like the amount of times you find yourself in life, it's not just for teenagers and 20-somethings. Let's just acknowledge that. You can't live life for 60 to 70 years and not have to find yourself at least 20 different times. Anyway, I love when somebody is in a small town finding themselves or having to start over for some reason, and you get to see that journey and you get to see them get to know new characters and how these characters are changing this person whose life may have not been in a great place, which is why they're starting over or trying to find themselves. I really love books like that. And a small town setting book that doesn't necessarily fit somebody finding themselves, but it has the vibes that I really liked in terms of small towns are like The Raven Boys, or I really liked The Dead in the Dark, and I have a few other books on my radar that are technically set in small towns. I will say that there is a lack of small town books in my life on my TBR shelf. I have a lot of television shows that have this small town vibe that I'm looking for. And recently I played the new installment of Life is Strange. I can't remember if it's like Ultraviolet or something. That is set in a small mountain town. I actually think it's set in Colorado or something like that. And those vibes, those are the vibes I'm looking for. I want them in more books. So if you have recommendations for those, leave it down below. Oh, The Weight of the Stars, great example of small town book. Character dynamics, that was... I also love platonic friendships in books. I think we don't see enough of that, especially in fantasy, YA, anything. Like, I don't know very many books except for like Radio Silence where friendship is like the goal. It's usually all about romance, which there's nothing wrong with that, but I would love to see platonic friendships or like seek out books with more platonic friendships, which actually, you know, you do get that a lot in fantasy, and that's like another vibe is friendship groups. I love friendship groups. I especially love it when you have all types of different personalities in this friendship group, and the friendship group kind of doesn't seem like they should go together by any means. Like these personalities in theory don't fit, but they work perfectly in these stories. I think that's why I like the Grishaverse, is because I did like the friendship group. Again, I could use The Weight of the Stars because the friendship group in there is incredible. But further, yes, I love a good friendship group, but a found family, superior vibe, superior trope. It is the best trope, and I don't think I need to explain that. Also, I love any and all queerness. I really, really, really eat that shit up because obviously I identify with that, but it's just really nice to see queer people thriving in books. That's really the vibe. When everyone is thriving and falling in love or not falling in love and having platonic friendships and really supportive friendships and having supportive groups of people around them, that is the real vibe. I love sarcasm in books, but I do think that it has to be done really well. So that's why you always have that one character who's like the relief character because they're sarcastic, but they're brooding. They're kind of a little bit of an asshole, but you love them because of all of those things, and they bring like a little bit of lightness to the story. More recently, one of the sarcastic characters that I liked was Dara in City of Brass, although I don't feel like he's consistently sarcastic through the entirety of the series. That goes along with what's happening in the series, but really liked him. There's actually quite a few sarcastic characters in the David Bob trilogy, so I'll just use that. Can you tell that that's what I've been thinking about recently? I also love royalty, but I don't necessarily want it to be like European. I don't know if this makes sense. Anything that's not European royalty setting, I'm usually like really into it. When it's European royalty setting, I'm not into it, but I don't gravitate towards that very often. I also love when you have royalty, right? That's the vibe going on there, and you're following one of the family royalty, the king, the queen, whatever, their children, and they all do shit that like goes against their family's wishes because it might put them in danger or it might like sully the name of the throne. I just love rebellious royalty kids. You know, they're sneaking out when they're not supposed to. They're dating people they're not supposed to. I don't know why I love that. Like, there is such a vibe of when in a story, say you have a princess and she has no desire to rule this kingdom. Like, she doesn't want that pressure. She just wants to have a good time. And you have a few scenes where she's like sneaking out to go to the peasant area and just hang out because she wants to feel normal. I don't know why I love that vibe. I guess my list is going back to characters, because another vibe, and I think this fits with royalty, is just probably why I wrote it near royalty on this list. I love when there's characters fighting for what they think is the greater good, or it is the greater good for them, but probably not for other people, because that's like the give and take. But I also love when a character who is so adamant about what they're fighting for in the beginning of a book has an arc where they start to find out things about how what they're fighting for actually is not for the greater good. It is for the good of like their people. Maybe it's a king and queen situation and it's actually only good for that line so that they can keep power. And this person starts to figure out that that's what they're fighting for, and what they've been fed for many years is a lie. And they start to have this arc where they change and believe differently. I think that's really cool too. I really like that vibe, because again, going back to like finding yourself a million times in your life, I think we all change a lot throughout our lives, and I like to see that growth in books. But I guess specifically for people who they're adamantly fighting for something and then they get different information and they pivot and change and like evolve. But at the same time, I also love morally gray characters. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that I want that morally gray character to win, but I love morally gray characters. I also actually like a book where everybody is morally gray. That's a vibe. Very different vibes, but I like both of those vibes, and I am a multifaceted person, so I can like both of those vibes, even though they're very contradictory to one another. And because I like morally gray characters, I really do like an evil ass character. Like, give me a really evil character and I'm probably going to enjoy that character. Even if I want them to die, I'm gonna enjoy that character, because I think a really well-written evil person, especially with like a good backstory, such a good time. It's such a good time. This is mainly another one for like fantasy reads. I love when gods exist in some capacity, like whether or not somebody can commune with the gods, or gods have been unleashed unto the world. I love gods being involved somehow, especially vindictive gods, or gods that like do not want humans bullshit anymore. That is a really good time for me personally. So the next three kind of go hand in hand. So I love a fall vibe. Anything fall vibes is for me. I love a cult vibe, because I don't know that I love cult books, because I have tried a few and they haven't really worked for me. I have been under the impression it's because they haven't been executed well enough for me, but it could be that I don't like cult fiction books, I guess. But I love when something has like a cult vibe to it, so it's confusing. But if it has like a culty vibe to it, I'll probably enjoy it or like want to read it. But I love ghosts and haunted houses. The only thing is, it has to be real. You can't have a cop-out as the explanation for a haunted house or like a ghost in your haunted house. Please. It's not a human in a basement. It's not like something stupid like that, please. I want it to be real. I want something like really sinister and creepy to be happening for me to buy this haunted house story. But if you can't give me a haunted house story that's like legitimately haunted house ghosts, at least give me vampires, witches, werewolves. Any of the three, I'm here for it. I love it. I don't know that I'll ever stop loving the idea of witches and vampires and werewolves in books, even though there are a lot of really bad ones out there. I just love it. Another vibe is animal companions, but also dragons. But if it's actually like dragons and not there's a dragon on the cover to lure me in as a reader, because I'm a sucker for dragons and they know it and they get me by the covers, and then there's like one page that mentions a dragon like flying in the sky, or existing at one point in time, and you're like, what has it all been about? Animal companions or dragons? Or both? If you give me both, I swear to God. Recently, I've discovered that I am struggling with sci-fi, so I tried to think back to science fiction that I've loved, and what I've realized is all of the science fiction that I love are science fiction books where they're not explaining anything to me, and it doesn't feel clinical, and it doesn't feel like I really even need to know what the fuck is going on in space to understand what's happening. Probably character driven, probably a cozy sci-fi. For example, Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. It's like the perfect sci-fi for me because it's really character driven. There was stuff happening in space, but do I know really what they were doing? No. It didn't take away from the story for me. On a Sunbeam, same situation. I actually recommend those in tandem. I think they're very similar vibes. Cozy sci-fi vibes. Anything set in space where I don't need to deal with what is happening externally and like why your ship is failing and why everyone's dying because they were stuck in cryo sleep for like 2,000 years and like they had a 30% fail rate. I can't do it. I can't. So cozy sci-fi, that's for the dumb girls. That's the vibe. I think this goes back to like fantasy and sci-fi, but when you get a perspective of a character, now I like multi-perspective fantasy books, but I also just like multi-perspective books in general. And I think in fantasy, multi-perspective narratives work really, really well, especially when you have the vibe I'm about to talk about, which is a character who is new to this world, never knew this world existed, is now being thrust into this world, and you get to learn about it through their eyes. But I think it's very specific that they're only one perspective of at least 2 or 3 so that you can have a little more explanation about this world from somebody who's living in it. Because sometimes what can happen when you are learning about a world through a person who's never been to this world before or never experienced it, it can be a lot of info dumping. And that's usually mitigated by somebody else who has lived in this world and knows it. You know, I'm just gonna say it. I love love triangles if they're done well. I think any trope can be done well and somebody can like it in specific books and not in other books. I've read many of love triangle that I do not like, but I've read other love triangles that I'm like, I'm about it. Like Daughter of the Moon Goddess, recently read that, loved the love triangle. I'm typically rooting for the wrong person, clearly, because they never end up with the person that I'm rooting for. I don't know if that says something about me, probably does, but I also really love pining. Pining is probably my favorite trope when it comes to any romantic elements within a book, whether it's a romance book, romance fantasy, or just romance in a fantasy. Pining gets me every time. You have pining characters, I'm gonna be pining with them. And then the last vibe that I want to talk about is not even a vibe, it's just short story collections based off of fantasy worlds that you love about the characters that you love. You just get more, right? That's such a vibe. Yes, I'm talking about the David Bode trilogy, and yes, I'm talking about the River of Silver. Silver River? No, the River of Silver. And how you got a collection of short stories about these precious characters, and you got to see so many great things. So many great things. That's a vibe. And I think I'm gonna end there. There are a lot of things that I love in books. There are a lot of vibes I love in books. I could go on forever, but I think those are the ones that are probably my favorite vibes because I thought of them first. Let me know your favorite vibes. Also, let me know if you have any book recommendations that fit these vibes. And yeah, I will talk to you next time. Bye.